everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in this episode of Germanator Studios, we are going to be continuing work on our prehistoric themed world. And I'm starting off by extending the main pathway that goes around the lake. I wanted to have a good idea to begin with of where this is going to go in the end, because much like the little cave we put at the beginning, I would like to have some sort of bridge or transitional gateway into the next world, and I want to put that in that little straight spot that's sort of uh, right there on the left of the screen. So I just wanted to get that there and have an idea of where that would be and where I could build that. But right here, I am building another restroom because, frankly, you can't really have too many restrooms in an amusement park. In any place where there's going to be a ton of people, you can't have too many restrooms. Obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. And this is just a simple building using the bamboo wall pieces. Nothing too crazy. Actually, I believe these are the wattle walls, but they're from the bamboo wall set. I will use the actual bamboo walls later, but I use them somewhat sparingly. You'll see what I do with them. But what I want to do with this section is basically have the main pathway feel like some sort of tribal outpost or community. And then behind that will be where the dinosaurs are, and then behind that will be the volcano, which, if you saw the thumbnail, we will build later in this episode. And that is a whole interesting thing in and of itself. But right here, I wanted to get started with a gift shop, and it's pretty similar to the other shops we've designed. I realize that this is technically the first big gift shop we have designed. We did the candy shop in a previous episode, and we designed the restaurant in a previous episode. And now that I think about it, we did have the museum gift shop, but this could be considered the first standalone gift shop. It's not associated with any ride or attraction. Now, I will say I did not choose yet which store or which stalls we're going to include on the inside, but it will be a gift shop, and the reason I say that is because I designed it to be a gift shop with a stock room in the back as opposed to something more akin to a kitchen layout. But that's nothing we need to get into at this moment. So you can see I'm going with the plaster walls here for the exterior, and I'm also putting a bit of supports up the, I can't remember what that piece is called, but those little bamboo girder-like pieces. I think it's called bamboo supports up in the rafters, and I decided to make a little bit of a loft, just have a nice look from the inside. And I also included some windows, but I was a little bit sparing. I figured with that tribal type design, there probably would not be a ton of light getting into these buildings. Obviously, you need some, and because we're in an amusement park, there would be some electric light in there. Although, actually, if we're being specific, I think I placed torch pieces in there. Just don't tell OSHA. Anyway, so I sort of designed it so that way the natural light getting in would be somewhat restricted, and from one side of the building. And here you can see me putting in the stalls in. Eventually there will be 3 vending spaces in here. I did put 4 to start, but I ended up keeping the corners of the building clean, just have a little alcove area in the gift shop design sense, it would be for additional shelving space, but we don't have actual shelving or anything like that in Rollercoaster Tycoon, so we just have to settle for some benches. Nothing too crazy. And here you can see me putting those torches in, and eventually, what am I doing? Trash cans. Putting trash cans in. That's another thing. On the subject of things you can't have too many of in your theme park, trash cans is one of them. In fact, on the subject of trash cans, I believe it was Walt Disney World conducted a study to see how far people in real life would walk with trash before disposing of it or just littering it. And I think the average is like 20 or 30 feet. So that's if you go to a Disney park or any park at this point, because I think it's kind of a standardized number, you'll see trash cans about every 20 to 30 feet. Um, I know for a fact Disney abides by that. But here you can see I'm redesigning the stock room to be an actual behind the scenes area. So I'm using that go away green color we talked about in another episode. Granted, I'll tell you now what I'm going to do with the actual bamboo walls, like I mentioned earlier, is we will use those to create the border wall, or border fence, if you want to call it that, between the front area and the back area. So after that's all said and done, it shouldn't you shouldn't be able to see past that. Here I am doing that now. So you shouldn't even be able to see that go away green section. But as always, if you're designing something behind the scenes that you don't want people to see, it's still a good rule of thumb to make it that color. And here what I'm going to do in just a moment is design a little access path to the behind the scenes area. Um, Obviously, guests can't walk on this, but I still put a little fence in there to make it for sure that they can't walk on it. Then we put a chain fence back there in case anyone decides to hypothetically hop that little railing. Um, and then now we're just moving on to a border between the path and the lake. And I was experimenting with, well, you'll see here, I put this stone wall along here because it transitions nicely into the cave. And I experimented with putting the tribal fence on top of it. And I I honestly liked the way this looked. But you'll see in a moment when I experiment with the safari fence, I noticed that the tribal fence is actually hovering over the stone fence or the stone wall and not actually resting inside of it. So we had to abandon that idea. And I went one tile over to place the actual safari fence because I thought that'll make a nice, clean, and proper border between the two, between the path and the lake, to make sure no one tries to go for a swim. Um, and you may be wondering if this is necessary, and well, this theme park is based in America, so yes, it is necessary. um, and yeah, so I'm just finishing that up here. I decided to extend that all the way around, and I think I'm going to use the safari fence as the primary fence between the lake and the paths. And I really like it because it's a very it's a clear border that you're not supposed to go past, but it also has a lot of it's very see-through. And there you just saw me finishing off the concrete in the behind the scenes area. And now we are starting on the volcano, and I spent a lot of time working on this, and I actually so you're gonna see me complete one version, and then I'm basically gonna redesign it to make it similar to the Expedition Everest mountain, which I will explain later. But the first version you see is the one I like better, so I might put in the effort and just redesign it from scratch in the next episode, but I would love to hear your opinions when you see both of them. So I'll try to point out when the first one is done and when we move on to the second one. You can see here I started with just bringing up a single tile to the height I wanted it, and I went down to the free look view to make sure it was to figure out what height I wanted it to be. And that turned out nicely. In both versions of the volcano, I do like the height it ends up being. Um, and yeah, so you can see it's rather small. I mean, this is definitely not a full-size volcano. That I shouldn't have to explain that. Um, but I like the way it turned out. In making it, even though it's shorter, I also made it narrower, so it still looks proportional. Um, and using limited tiles, one thing I didn't realize is that creating a natural sort of flow and making it not look square on the edges was a lot easier said than done. But just by going through with some of the different terrain tools, I was able to fine tune it and adjust it. Like you can see me here, just putting a bump in the side of it, and I tried to do that around the place. And I want to say after this one, or at some point, I go over and just use the elevation, like the tool that just raises up the terrain when you hold down the click button, the whatever you want to call it, the mouse button. um, I ended up using that tool around the place, and I used the smoothing tool as well. So, but first, here's what you can see me doing is painting it, and I use a technique I saw in a Silverette video, where he basically creates a checkerboard. Um, in his version, he did it just for a big expanse of terrain, but what he did was create a checkerboard pattern with one terrain texture he wanted to use, and then he went on the remaining pieces and used the other one. And if you use a piece like the concrete, or a texture like the concrete, where it's always going to be square at the edges, it makes it really quite an easy technique to implement. Um, and here you can see me going through and adding some more texture to the mountains. And this whole process, I mean, it took, I don't want to say a super long time. I think I did all of the building you see here in under an hour, or about an hour and a half tops. Um, and that's all the building you see in this whole episode. So I really like the way this one turned out because it follows that idea of less is more. And ultimately, I think it worked out better for the look of the volcano. Um, I mentioned in the last episode, I sort of want the volcano to be smaller and look like it's in the distance. And you can see here it is smaller. Um, but, and this is where we get into making it look like more like the Expedition Everest Hotel, or Expedition Everest Mountain. Um, this is a fun fact you may not know, but Expedition Everest, when you're looking at that ride, that's at Disney's Animal Kingdom, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. The tallest peak is supposed to represent Everest, but all of the mountains from like the ground up to maybe 2/3 of the height, all of those are supposed to be the mountains in front of it. So you're actually looking at a from the story standpoint, it's like supposed to be like you're looking at a range of mountains, not one single mountain. And I wanted to do that here by readjusting so the actual volcano would seem to be behind a bunch of mountain peaks. Um, and it you'll see I spend a little while on this. Granted, we're at 4 times speed, so it's not going to be as long as I remember it. Um, but in the end, the effect worked nicely when the camera was moving, panning from side to side. Um, as you'll see, I won't get into too much details, but it just, the mountain and the volcano, it all just looks kind of unrealistic in the end. So that's something we will revisit. Um, but you'll see that when we see that. And I'll explain what I was doing here. So I wanted to use mist around the side of the mountain, and you can see there's already some there. And I wanted to do that to make it look like there was a layer of clouds to add that illusion of height. Um, and I would say the illusion actually does work pretty well. But I decided that I wanted to have sort of a utility catwalk area, I guess, on the side of the mountain to separate the volcano itself from the peaks of the foreground mountains, we'll call it. Um, and you can see me designing that here where there's sort of a jagged edge. Um, and that edge will eventually, like, as you can kind of see, I've already started it, but I vary the height of all of those just to make it look more natural. Um, and that, yeah, that doesn't take too long. Um, so overall, I would say the individual components of this build worked relatively well, but I think the main issue I had with this whole foreground mountain concept is that it looks like a weird volcano peak on a giant uneven square block. Those edges are on the sides, they look very straight and square, and they don't look natural leading up to the peaks. I think the peaks look fine, and the volcano looks fine behind them, as you'll see, but it's just the whole sides of it that doesn't quite work. Um, but yeah, I keep jumping the gun, I guess. So I should really be talking about what I'm doing. Um, there, I'm just putting a little bit of a border on there. I guess you could call it a toe board if you want to use the term for what it is. It's basically just a board along the side of the walkway to keep people from essentially tripping, because there are some divots where the volcano dips below the elevation of the walkway, and it's better to have someone trip into a almost wall than to sprain their ankle in a little divot. And there you can see me. I made the pathway go down a ramp into a doorway, so presumably there would be a staircase inside of the volcano structure and an access path on the backside where the service road is. Um, if I keep this concept, which I would like to try and just make the base of the structure better as opposed to redesigning the whole thing, because I like the idea of the access path. So if I keep that, I will in the next episode add that little access point on the back of the structure. Um, but a big component of this is like the whole back side of the structure can be seen from that pathway outside of the park. So I want to make it look as realistic as possible from that side, so as not to kill the immersion entirely. Um, I want it. I want people not to feel like, oh, before they even enter the park, oh, that's not even a real mountain. Um, and we're almost to the end of our clips here. I'm just putting some foliage down just to make the thumbnail look nicer. But you can see what I mean. That does not look natural at all. So that's everything I have. I will see you guys in the next episode. I will have an episode out on Friday. I plan to, but I will still wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Um, so until next time, goodbye.